Good morning, everyone. It's Lee Henson here, president and founder of Agile Dad, and it's time for today's episode of the Daily Stand-Up. So without any further ado, let's get started. It's Tuesday, and I hope you enjoyed our first installment of the Agile Expert series with Jim York. That was a lot of fun. If you didn't have a chance to watch the full video, realize that the full video is available on our YouTube channel. So I'll drop the link to the YouTube channel one more time here. But the whole interview lasted 25 minutes, and we gave you a compressed 10-minute version, 10 to 15-minute version for the daily stand-up. So I hope you enjoyed that. The theme was on product ownership. So today I wanted to continue that theme with a theme of product value. Now, this is where things are going to get interesting. So I want to start with an analogy. So here's the analogy. If Teresa just built her house and she loves her new home, but they're in the throes of installing their dream backyard, yes? And one of the things that she needs to do in that dream backyard is she needs to plant some trees. Now, we'll assume that these trees aren't extremely large trees. We'll assume that she has to dig a hole big enough to fit a 5-gallon container tree, which isn't a huge tree, but it's still a significant tree, right? At this point, she's going to have 3 options on how she is going to get the hole dug so that she can put the tree in. The first option would be using her hands. The second option would be using a shovel. And the third option would be using a tractor. Now, while many of you might be thinking, this is easy, it's common sense. We all know that, using a shovel would be the best option, right? Let's end the podcast here. That may not be the case, and let me explain. So let me give you a couple of examples where each one could be applicable. So let's start with using your hands. Now, one of the things that I've run into, especially living in Florida, is that sometimes with the land being so swampy in certain areas, or sometimes with the land just being so easy to dig, that a lot of times people will become lazy. And what will happen is when they're putting in, let's just say, electrical lines to go outside, or sprinkler pipes if you live in an area of Florida where you may need sprinklers for part of the year. What will happen is people tend to bury cables about 6 inches below the dirt, which is crazy, I know, but I can tell you firsthand that I've seen this. In fact, when we purchased our home in Florida, someone took the real estate sign and hammered it in when our home was for sale, and busted through the telephone line of our neighbors. And they only hammered the real estate sign in this far, so less than a foot. So what I'm trying to say is, maybe in Florida it would be a good idea for us to clear an area by hand down through about 6 to 8 inches to make sure that we're good to go. And then once we get past that 6 to 8 inch mark, then we could use some type of tool utensil just to make sure we're not busting through any lines, pipes, or anything else, because sometimes it might be hard for us to tell. And I know what you're thinking. Yeah, call 511 and they'll mark everything for you and tell you where everything is. That's great. But if you're planning a whole yard, sometimes it's easier for you just to say, I want a tree here, or I want a tree here. And you have to end up digging those holes. In this case, it may be better to do it by hand. However, the costs for doing it by hand are astronomical. It's going to take an incredible amount of time to dig each hole. It's going to require a lot of physical strain and effort, and she could potentially hurt herself. And her friends and neighbors are going to look at her and think she's crazy digging every single hole by hand, trying to, get to where she needs to be. And in the end, she'll be completely filthy and just not happy with the outcome, right? So there are benefits, but there's also some cost that goes with it, and there is some risk. Let's use the same example and say she's going to use a shovel. Now, the risk is that if she's digging in Florida, she may cut through a line of some kind. The risk if she were doing this in, let's just say, Utah, is that with the amount of clay they have in the soil, and with boulders and other factors, there's a good chance she'll hit rock at some point, or heavy clay, and it's just going to be very hard to dig. First of all, I want to say that would make it impossible to do by hand. But is a shovel the best option? In this case, the shovel is going to be a lot faster than using your hands. I mean, I'm even going to factor in and say up to 10 times faster. But there's no emotional impact. So when our neighbors see her, it's pretty normal to dig a hole with a shovel. Everybody will be like, oh yeah, she's just digging a hole. From a cost perspective, you do have to spend some money to get a decent shovel. You're not just going to get the cheapest shovel you can. I mean, I guess you could, but then you have to worry about getting gloves with it because it's just not a good handle and those kind of things. I think it's easier if you just spend a few more dollars on a shovel and get a good one. The amount of effort. It's going to still require some physical effort, but in the end, it's going to require less effort than doing everything by hand, and you're still going to have to find a place to store the shovel when you're finished. So it makes sense to use a shovel in probably the majority of the cases, but it may not always make sense to use a shovel if you know you're going to end up hitting boulders and rocks. If you know that you're going to run a risk of cutting through lines and other things, you have to assess the risk before you can determine a value. And finally, if you decided to use a tractor, whether you rent a tractor or buy a tractor, okay, that's going to be even faster than using a shovel, especially if you end up having to move big rocks. I'm going to say that it could be up to 10 times faster than using a shovel. But, it's not going to require much physical effort at all, but there's a huge cost. Let me explain. So first, if you're going to buy a tractor, that's going to cost a pretty penny. Tractors are not cheap, right? Second, from a time perspective, you're not going to invest as much time doing the actual digging, but you're going to have to find a tractor that's for sale or for rent in your area. You have to have it transported to your house. You'll have to learn how to use the tractor. You'll have to take time to figure out how to implement a tractor and to make sure everything's marked before you start digging. And then you have to know what to do when you encounter large rocks or boulders, or what to do to make sure you're not digging too far, that you're using the tractor correctly. There's just a lot of things that go into making sure you're prepared. From an effort perspective, the effort comes up front with what you do to acquire the tractor. And then if you're going to buy it, figuring out how to transport it. And then finally, how you're going to store it, right? So there's a lot of a trickle effect there. But from an emotional impact perspective, the neighbors are going to be really frustrated especially if they live close, that you're using a tractor to dig a hole. It's loud. It's not a happy time, and people are going to give you angry looks. And I get it. But many landscape companies do use tractors, and they quickly dig the hole and they quickly drop the tree in and you're good to go. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's an application for each of these that provides value. If there wasn't, why wouldn't every landscape contractor use a shovel? Or why wouldn't every person just skip the tools altogether and use their hands? And I think that sometimes when you start talking about product value, you're not taking things into consideration like risk, time, factoring in things like emotional impact. I think sometimes we're quick to judge and quick to jump to certain types of value. But it's easy for us if we can see the whole picture and understand what's going to happen. But if you just threw a monkey wrench into the whole equation and said, let's hypothetically say that the tractor costs the exact same amount as a shovel, would Rebecca buy the tractor now? Or what if all three were free? If you could borrow a friend's tractor and they lived next door, or you could borrow a neighbor's shovel, or you could dig it by hand. I think sometimes you would lean towards, well, if I have the ability to get the tractor, absolutely, same cost, less time, I'm in. But there's higher risk. So it's just one of these things where there's so many things that you need to factor in. And I think that this is the conundrum that many people run into when they start talking about product value. So I think when we start talking about product value, the things we need to understand are the consumer value, the strategic or business value, and then the value to the team that's doing the work. Is it going to help with something architecturally or infrastructurally in the future? And I think that if you factor in all three of those, then you can start having the right discussion around risk, around assessing what's going to happen in the end. Is it meeting key performance indicators? Is it going to fall into the right place with us from a cost perspective? And I think it's going to help you have a deeper understanding of the things that you need to do. So I guess in summary, the next time you're thinking about digging a hole, just kidding. The next time you're thinking about your product, try challenging yourself to think a little deeper. Think about measurable things that you can measure and things that you can figure out. But also I want you to think about, beyond measurable benefits and costs, I want you to think about the emotional impact and the social impact that what you're doing is going to have on yourself, what impact is going to have on the environment, and how is it going to impact all the other players that are involved, the stakeholders that you may not be considering. Because I think if you do this, that's going to help you really have a better understanding of business value. Some tools you can use. There are many dashboards and indicators and tools you could use to figure this out. There are people who do value stream type things to figure out where they are, empathy mapping. journey mapping. There's a lot of tools that you can use. There's lean model canvas, business model canvas, and these are things that are going to help you better understand value. So what I encourage you to do is go out and scour and find out a little more information. If you want to learn more about these other topics, we have other Agile Dad podcasts and other documents that'll help you through your product ownership journey to really help you zoom in and focus on product value. I hope you found this information helpful. As always, we encourage you to tune in at agiledad.com where you can learn more about this topic and many others. Until next time, my friends, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile. Whatever you do, stay safe and do take care.